Welcome back to the 3 months of Modal Logic, the sequel to 100 Days of Logic here with Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our Carneades Halloween edition number 3 and our Deontic Logic bonus videos with the 3 paradoxes of Deontic Logic. If you don't know anything about Deontic Logic and you haven't checked out my previous series from October on Deontic Logic, you might want to do that now. So in this video, it's our first video here with our actual paradox. We're going to be looking at the free choice permission paradox. So what I want you to do is look at these two statements and use your Deontic Logic skills to turn them into logical statements. So the first statement, O, is you may go to the zoo or to the park. All right? The second statement, A, is going to be you may go to the zoo and you may go to the park. All right? Those are our two statements. If you want to pause the video now, give it a try yourself. Try interpreting these as Deontic Logic statements. All right? With obligatory and permissible and all that jazz. Okay? Now, whatever you did to interpret them, it seems that what I'm about to offer is at least a plausible interpretation of these two statements. So we could say that O would be, it's permissible that Z or P, and A would be, it's permissible that Z and it's permissible that P. So you may go to the zoo or to the park. It's permissible that you go to the zoo or you go to the park. And you may go to the zoo and you may go to the park. It's permissible that you go to the zoo, and it's permissible that you go to the park. Hopefully, those make sense. They seem pretty intuitive as far as ways to interpret these statements go. So our intuitions would say that O implies that A, that if it's permissible that either Z or P, or both, remembering that disjunction in logic is always going to be inclusive, or our or is always going to work like an and or, then it's permissible that Z and it's permissible that P, since, as I said, the logical or is inclusive and works like an and or. So basically, if you're allowed to either go to the zoo, the park, or both, it seems that you're both permitted to go to the zoo and you're permitted to go to the park. So we might want to formulate this in terms of some theorem or axiom that it's permissible that P or Q implies that it's permissible that P and it's permissible that Q. We're going to call that OA. And yet, however intuitive this may seem, OA is not going to be a theorem of standard Deontic logic. We can't prove it using the axioms we have. And in fact, including it as an axiom itself will lead to a very problematic conclusion for standard Deontic logic, namely that all propositions are going to be permissible and that no propositions are obligatory. Now, while many of us may want to have no obligations and have everything be permissible, this is going to be very problematic for anyone that wants to really construct a concrete or understandable Deontic logic. So let's take a look at why this happens. So if you want to, on your own, I would highly encourage you to try this proof. Take OA, all the rules of Deontic logic we've learned so far. Feel free to use either the kind of K, D, T, these things, or the Deontic equivalence axiom and how we've stated them there. However you want to use them, use those axioms and see if you can prove that all propositions are permissible and no proposition is going to be obligatory. Try that on your own. If you've tried that or you've given up and you just want to see me do it, let's move on. So, first off, what I'm going to do is we're going to take the generic rule of addition, which basically says that for all x and all y, x implies x or y. If you want more information on that, check out the original 100 Days of Logic. We're going to use universal instantiation on that to get P implies P or Q. We'll then use transposition to put some negations in there. We'll use the Deontic equivalence axiom, some version of it, or the K, if you would like, to get it's obligatory that it's not the case that P or Q implies that it's obligatory that not P. Then we'll use transposition once again to throw some more negations in there, and we'll use our Deontic definitions to get it's permissible that P implies it's permissible that P or Q. All right? Now, what we're going to do next is kind of the important step in this that really makes it start to make sense maybe of why the OA is going to be a really problematic axiom. So, it's permissible that P implies that it's permissible that P and it's permissible that Q. That comes from premise 6, OA, and hypothetical syllogism. That's the one where we just kind of put a set of implications in a row and get rid of the middle term. So basically, if some P is permissible, that means that it's both permissible that that P and some other Q. All right? Hopefully from this point you should see where we're going with the rest of this proof. This point is very key in kind of getting to the central problem with OA as an axiom. But we'll go through the steps anyway, so we'll use implication to turn that into a disjunction. We'll use distribution to distribute R. It's not the case that it's permissible that P. We'll simplify that down to it's not the case that it's permissible that P or it's permissible that Q. Use implication to get to it's permissible that P implies that it's permissible that Q. And because we can now universally generalize out of that, we get for all X and all Y, it's permissible that X implies that it's permissible that Y. Premise 11, universal generalization. If premise 7 wasn't worrying to you, premise 12 should be. All right? Think about what that means, and we're going to keep going. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start an assumed indirect proof going down where we're going to assume there exists some X such that X is obligatory. In the next line, we can instantiate that X to its obligatory that X. Then we're going to use a couple of different things in a row. De Morgan's law, the Deontic non-contradiction axiom, and universal instantiation, basically, to get it's not the case it's obligatory that A, or it's not the case it's obligatory that not A. Hopefully it makes sense where that's going and how we're using all of those things kind of in one swooping step. Next up, we're going to use implication to get it's obligatory that A implies it's not the case it's obligatory that not A. And then our deontic definitions to get it's obligatory that A implies it's permissible that A. That should make sense. This kind of falls directly out of our deontic non-contradiction axiom and what makes sense of us when we think about maybe the deontic square of opposition or our deontic trifold classification. If something's obligatory, it makes sense that it's permissible. So using 14 and 17, we can get it's permissible that A. Using 12 universal instantiation. So remember what 12 was. It was what I said was a really problematic premise. You might want to rewind the video and check that out. Again, we can universally instantiate X to A and Y to not A to get it's permissible that A implies that it's permissible that not A, which basically says that all permissible propositions are going to be optional in some way, which means they're not going to be obligatory. So we can go from 18 and 19 to 20. It's permissible that not A, 18, 19 modus ponens, which by our deontic definitions will give us it's not the case it's obligatory that A. We can then go ahead and conjoin 14 and 21 to get it's not the case it's obligatory that A, and it is obligatory that A, which is going to be a contradiction. So we're going to end up with it's not the case there exists some X such that X is obligatory. If nothing else is giving you a sign that we have a problem with deontic logic, this should. We're basically saying with this premise that it's not the case there exists any X such that X is obligatory. With a change of quantifier, we can get one of our targets for this proof, which is that for all X, it's not the case that X is obligatory. Basically, you have no obligations. Now, premise 25, we're going to go ahead and universally instantiate that. We'll use our deontic definitions to switch it over to permissibility. We'll do a universal instantiation on premise 12 once again. And then we're going to go ahead and conclude via modus ponens. It's permissible that P, but the problem, of course, is we can jump back out into a universal generalization to get for all X is permissible that X is what that should be. Premise 28, universal generalization. Basically, for any proposition, that proposition is permissible. All right? Note in premise 29 that should read, for all X is permissible that X. So, Therefore, if you don't want to arrive at the conclusion that all propositions are permissible, we can never conclude that if you may either go to the zoo or the park, that you may then go to the zoo and you may go to the park. This is going to be paradoxical because it's a problem for our basic intuition that OA should be included in Deontic logic. If you don't have this intuition, this is not going to be much of a paradox for you. But for anyone that has that intuition that it's permissible that you do either this or that, then it's permissible that you can do both, you're going to have a significant problem for Deontic logic. Up next, we're going to be looking at Ross's paradox. Once again, for Deontic logic, watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.